Voice onset time. Voice onset time is one of the important features of the classification of stops. And in order to fully describe the stop sound, we need to know the overall tendency of the language about the production of stops. And then we can also talk about the classification of the voicing, the nature of voicing within a particular stop, right? So voice onset time, voice, it's about voicing. Onset, it's start, right? So starting before, right? Onset. And time, we are particularly interested in knowing the nature of time, right? So how much time is involved, right? So that's the point under voice onset time. In order to describe and classify a consonant, we need to know the features of stops. Like, for example, the voicelessness during the release in aspirated sound, right? Because when does this voicelessness, and when does it start? So that's the point to be described under VOT, voice onset time, right? Um, VOT is basically the interval between the release of the closure, right? Because for stop, we create a closure. We close off the air passage which is coming from our larynx, right? So that's a requirement for the production of stop sound. So that closure is released, okay? So the difference between the release of that closure and then the start of the voicing. So that interval is important. That is to be measured, and that measuring is called VOT, voice onset time. The easiest way to determine and to understand VOT is to visualize a speech sound in terms of waveform. And that is what I'm doing for you right now. Remember that the duration is measured in terms of millisecond, right? In terms of millisecond, and we are measuring the place between the spike of the release and then the oscillating of the voicing. So this difference between spike and oscillating, that's calculated, right? And that's important feature of the classification of stops. Right? So let me show you 3 stops of Sindhi, right? This is given in the book, right? These are Sindhi sounds in word like daru, which is in Sindhi, door, right? And taru, right? Like in Sindhi, it's the bottom, they call taru, and tharu, okay, aspirated. Tharu is the name of a district, okay? So these 3 possibilities are there. In the case of the, you see this voicing line, right? This voicing line is there, right? And it is already there, all right? So when the stop is released, this is the point where the stop is released, right? So in the case of the, what happens is that the voicing is already started, right? So the VOT, if it is calculated, it would be in minus, in negative, because it is already started. If this the 0 point, if we just consider this the 0 point, which is a 0 point, because it's the releasing point, okay? So when the sound is released, when the stop is released here, it is in minus, all right? And then in the case of t, which is unaspirated, this is unaspirated voiceless sound, right? Voiceless, but it is unaspirated, like in the case of taru, right? So if you just see, there is quite very little space, very little, it's almost 0, right? So this is the case of taru, because the voice onset time here may be called 0, just for your understanding, it may be called 0 in this case. And in the case of aspirated sounds, like tha, so you see, after the release, after the spike of the release and the oscillating of the voicing, you can see that there is a space, and this is in positive, right? So this the positive VOT. So these 3 are the possible description of VOT, voice onset time. And this time between the release of the consonant and then the start of the voicing is really important in order to classify the stops of a language. One more example is given from Navajo. In Navajo, this is the trend that the VOT is exceptionally long, right? Like in Tha, if you can just calculate this in terms of ms, millisecond, it makes around like maybe like 130 or 140, right? To be careful, it may be called 130 ms. So in this language, it's different. So it would classify, and this classification of VOT is quite important for the understanding of the features of the stops within a language.